after this evening. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Yurina Yoshikawa. Yurina is the Director of Education at The Porch. She holds an MFA from Columbia University, and her writing has appeared in The Atlantic, NPR, Lit Hub, the Japan Times, and elsewhere. Yurina was the winner of the 2020 Tennessee True Stories Contest, a 2021 recipient of the Tennessee Arts Commission, and the 2024 Tennessee State Fellow for the South Arts Prize in Literature. Yurina has lived in Tokyo, Palo Alto, and New York before settling down in Nashville, where she lives with her husband and 2 sons. So now I'll turn it over to Yurina. Thank you.
Thank you, Ginger, for that lovely introduction, and thank you to JAST. This is an organization I've loved ever since moving here in 2017, and it's such a great community. I love everything that you all do, and maybe at the end you can talk a little bit about some upcoming events that you have going on so that people who live around here can get to know you guys a little bit more. But before I get started, just a couple housekeeping notes. This is, as Ginger said, meant to be a recorded session so that people can view it afterwards. During this session, for those of you who are new to reading between the lines, I will give plenty of background and context of the book and the author, and we'll dive into some close reading of a few key passages. I like to design these in a way so that even if you have not read the book or have finished reading, you can still participate and enjoy, and we can all discuss as we go. And, as much as I prepared all these materials and, I'll have a presentation that we'll go through, if at any time you have a thought or question, I encourage you to unmute yourself and speak, or even use the chat function. I'll try to keep an eye on that. And, I'd love for this to feel like an interactive discussion. And there will be ample time at the end for open Q&A as well. So you can take notes and wait for that if you'd like. And also, there are times when I might, because I get tired of hearing my own voice, if I could get just a hand of some volunteers who might be able to read some things out loud for us. So anyone who has a good, who's in an environment where they can speak, maybe someone who's not in a quiet library. And even if you don't have the book, I will screen share the passage so that you can just read what's on the screen. But can I get some hands for any volunteers who might be able to do that? Allison, wonderful. Just Allison? Oh, I can't quite hear you, Allison.
Sorry, and Andy volunteered, I think.
Also. Oh, Andy? Thank you. All right, so there might be times later when I will call on either of you. So thank you for that. That will save me a little bit of time. And also, I think it'll be nice for us to hear each other's voices. All right, I'm gonna start sharing my screen. And like I said, at any point, please feel free to speak if you like, but we'll go over this from the beginning. Reading between the lines for butter. Can everybody see what's going on here? Yes, okay, I see some nodding heads, wonderful. And I'm gonna minimize my own screen where I can see your faces, just so that I can look at the screen too. So Butter is a book that I chose for this round. I thought this was, I know it's a very long book and it's kind of a slow burn, if you will, but I chose it because it has so many great themes that also relate to some other books that we've discussed in previous sessions that we can also talk about a little bit. But this was a book that was an instant cult bestseller in Japan when it came out. And the translation came out last year and has been getting a lot of buzz in the US as well. So I thought this would be a really fun one for us. This is a little background on the author, Asako Yuzuki. She was born in 1981 in Tokyo. And the reason she wanted to become a writer was when she was in junior high school, she fell ill, and during that time decided to read Kitchen by Banana Yoshimoto. Kitchen is a book that was published in 1988 and has been beloved by Japanese readers, including myself, ever since it came out. And you can tell throughout Butter all these influences from Banana Yoshimoto, just all the delicious descriptions of food, and how through the food and the meals and those moments, you actually get really deep very quickly into the human stories. That's what Banana does so well, and you can tell that Asako learned a lot from that. It's also interesting to note she was also influenced by American authors like Judy Blume and Beverly Cleary, and that she also studied French literature in university before she wrote a lot of books, including this one. And she has won multiple literary awards. And in Japan, some of her other works have been adapted for TV and radio. If you have Netflix, even in America, you can actually see one of the shows that was based on one of her books called The Many Faces of Ito. And this is sort of a romantic drama thriller. And there are some similar undertones as Butter. So if you enjoyed this book and you want a little bit more, you can head on over to Netflix and consume a little bit of that. So before we get into the fictionalized version of this, I wanted to point out Butter is actually based on a true story. And I will only say a few quick things about this, but because you can go down a really deep Wikipedia rabbit hole if you like on the real person this is based on. But just for quick context, she is dubbed the Konkatsu killer. Konkatsu is an abbreviation of kekkon katsudo, or marriage seeking, in particular with the way she used the marriage seeking websites. So it was kind of a catchy name, the Konkatsu killer. Her real name is Kanae Kijima, born in 1974 in Hokkaido. In Butter, she's born around the same time, also in Hokkaido, and her name is Manako Kaji. So you can tell that this sounds, even the names sound very similar. The real criminal, she was convicted of poisoning 3 would-be husbands, suspected of at least 4 more between the years 2007 and 2009. And she was initially arrested for fraud because she received millions of yen from each of these men, whose age ranged from anywhere between actually early 30s for some of them to all the way to 80. And the criminal trial happened in 2012, and the Supreme Court 5 years later ruled that she was guilty, and that because she seemed to show no remorse and she was clearly a serial killer, they sentenced her to death. And what's interesting is that even after you are sentenced in that way in Japan, which is still very rare, she's still just the 15th woman to be put on death row. She is still alive today, still incarcerated at the Tokyo Detention House, awaiting her time. So throughout this book, you will notice that a lot of the conversations take place also at the Tokyo Detention House. And in the Japanese legal system, there's a lot of that waiting period between the trials. And even after you're sentenced, you're just waiting. So they might, still have opportunities for journalists to come and talk to them and whatnot. But yes, the real person, the criminal in the book is based on, is still there. Let's see. So Butter in Japan, I wanted to give a little bit of a cultural context for the titular object and throughout this book. Butter is such a great metaphor throughout the story of decadence, of treating yourself, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But you might have noticed if you read the book that there's a lot of references to the brands. And so I wanted to show you at the top left here, I've shown you what the Snow brand butter looks like. It's translated in Japanese, it's yukijirushi. And you can see there's a picture of Hokkaido because that's where they come from. And Hokkaido is really well known for their dairy products. And the yukijirushi butter, it's good. It's butter. You'll find this at most grocery stores, even convenience stores. And, you buy it out of practicality. It'll still taste good on toast and whatever you make, but it's not quite, it's still pretty affordable. And if you wanted to treat yourself a little bit more, spend a little bit more money, you might at the grocery store in the fancier section find karubisu bata, and this is the one that's on the bottom left. Karabisu is another dairy product brand that's more well known for their yogurts and yogurty drinks. In America, they're actually, instead of karabisu, they're known as karapiko. So you might see some of those drinks sold at Asian grocery stores and whatnot, but their karabisu bata is a little bit, it tastes a little bit more creamy and a little fancier than the Snow brand. And this is the karabisu bata is the type that my father-in-law loves and prides himself on using for his morning toasts. Here at the bottom right, I've put a picture of the most generic margarine that you might find in Japan. It's called Neosoft or Neosofto, so it has a very artificial name. It says creamy, non-fat. It tastes good on bread, whatnot. But throughout this book, margarine is also a metaphor, for being the fake one. And we'll look at some examples of that too. And at the top right, I've put a picture of I don't quite know how to say this in the French. And if anybody here knows, I might have you unmute and say this, but in Japanese, it's echide butter. And echide, or, this is a French butter imported from France. And in Tokyo, there is a shop in Marunouchi Station, which is one of the biggest hubs in the city. There is a fancy echide specific shop that you can go to buy this butter, and it costs about 5 times more than the regular butter. In yen, an echide, this amount of echide butter would cost about 2,000 yen, which in dollars might be like $18. And whereas the other types of butter you might be able to get for 200 yen or 300 yen. So why am I showing you this? So in the beginning of the book, you are told that there is a butter shortage in Japan, and this actually does happen from time to time, most recently around 2015. And I suspect that that's what the author is drawing from, because the book was originally published in 2017. But there was a butter shortage because of multiple factors, but people attribute it to climate change. And the cows in Hokkaido and the Northern Islands, they got so hot and tired that they could not produce milk. Therefore, they could not make as much butter. Also, leading up to Christmas, when everyone's making cookies and cakes, there was just a lot of demand all of a sudden. And so I remember my parents describing whenever they went to grocery stores, there would be signs that said 1 butter per customer. And butter just became this luxurious thing. And I think, Reina, you were just talking earlier about how butter is also seen as kind of this luxurious thing. And I think that has a lot to do with the shortage that happens from time to time. So that's butter in Japan. And then I'm showing you, this is going to be a really quick overview, which, you'll see discussed at length if you read the book. But I wanted to mention just the relationship in Japan between food, gender roles, and beauty standards. So how do they all go together? So I've put 3 pictures of different kinds of meals that you might see in Japan. The first one, the top right, you see the rice bowl and the pickles and the soup and the eggs and the fish and the little tiny dishes. I mean, this is, an elaborate meal that you might even get at a hotel or a ryokan, which is like a hot springs. But a version of this is something that also can be achieved at home. And a lot of the times, who's making these elaborate home-cooked meals? That tends to fall on the women, the housewives. She will be making it for the rest of the family all day, every day. It really does feel like a full-time job. They'll go to the grocery store to get the freshest ingredients, and they'll wake up early to make the bento boxes and spend all afternoon marinating and, making all the little dishes that accompany the main dish, so on and so forth. So it's meal prepping, for traditional Japanese meal is quite intensive. A tier below from that, we get the convenience store meals or konbini meals, which I pictured here on the top left. This is a 7-Eleven bento. For those of you who might not be familiar with Japan, 7-Eleven is not like the 7-Elevens in America. 7-Eleven, you'll see convenience stores everywhere in Tokyo, but 7-Eleven foods are quite tasty, actually. And they do a lot of innovative stuff with snacks, bentos too. But, during Christmas time, when a lot of Japanese people like to eat fried chicken, the 7-Eleven fried chickens are, you have to actually be on a waiting list. You have to order them in advance in order to get them. It's such a treat, and they do such a good job, even though they're a big company and convenience stores. But you can see in this packaging too, like this bento box might cost less than $10, but it has a little bit of everything. It has the rice, it has eggs and other types of protein, and a salad. And you can still feel nourished and satisfied. But if you're going to eat convenience store bentos every day, or for many, many meals, there's a kind of loneliness, I want to say, that comes with that. Like, there's a feeling of you could just have this by yourself at home instead of enjoying it with, you would not typically buy a bunch of these and eat it together with a family. This is the kind of thing you might pick up because you're busy or because you live alone. And so Banana Yoshimoto, actually, in her books, she talks about convenience store foods a lot too. And there's some that are depicted in a really delicious, wonderful way. And other times it's kind of seen to show a character's loneliness. Now, a tier below that is the instant stuff, the cup noodles, and even the rice-based ones that can be prepped in under 3 minutes with hot water. And there's such a variety now, actually, and some of them are high quality despite the fact that they're instant. What I have loved in Butter in the novel is that you see instances of all three types of meals. And there's actually not a lot of judgment placed on any of them. In fact, towards the end, you get the sense that it's all about balance. And you can't always be expected to cook fancy meals or to expect someone else to prepare them all the time. And it's also okay to indulge in the instant noodles sometimes, if that satisfies you, and that's okay. And so I liked that the book spent a lot of time on the simple, quick things as well as the elaborate things. It kind of shows you the joys and satisfaction you can get from each. So just wanted to put that out there. Oh, and the thing about the beauty standards. So this is an interesting point that the book also makes over and over, but because it's the women who are typically making all of these elaborate foods for the traditional home cooked meals, it does feel like a contradictory that they're also expected to not consume so much and to maintain their thinness and beauty standards that have been just part of the societal norms for many, many decades. So I think in the book you see a lot of women expressing that frustration that why do they have to care so much about staying so thin while also being expected to cook all this good food? There's kind of a disconnect there, and the book is challenging that in a very direct way. Before we get to the passages, and I also want to open it up to the room after this slide, I wanted to just go over 3 main characters. There's a lot of other supporting characters, but for those who might be new to this book, this is all you need to know for the discussion we're going to have. So the main character here is Rika, and she is a journalist. She works for kind of a tabloid, place that really profits from gossip and getting the first scoop. And so she's really focused on succeeding in that career, and she lives alone. She's sort of single. She sort of has a boyfriend, but does not want to play the housewife role. And she's very curious, and she's determined to get to the bottom of something when she starts a project. One of her best friends is Reiko, who is a friend from childhood. Reiko is married. She's a great cook. And Rika also in the beginning is seen not even owning a rice cooker, and she eats konbini bentos all the time. On the contrast, Reiko is focused not on a career, but on getting pregnant. And she's also curious like Rika, and she is seen over and over again being a very supportive, empathetic friend. And That's one of the most beautiful things about this book, is that it ends up being so much about that friendship. And then last but not least, Manako Kaji. She's the, you know, the villain, if we are seeing these women kind of on a spectrum of these gender roles in Japan, Rika being the, independent feminist, Manako Kaji is on the other side of that. She has been with many men. She considers herself an anti-feminist. She takes pride in being the one caring for men. She even considers herself a goddess, someone who can, have so much power over men just by cooking these delicious foods and using that to lure them. And she's very anti-diet culture. When the case breaks out, the public, you see the descriptions of the media and just everyday people describing Kaji as, like big and fat, but Kaji herself she doesn't really care what other people think. And she's very against diet culture. In fact, she's obsessed with butter, and which is central to the book, obviously. And that's when, when these two women of such polar opposite mindsets and worldviews, when they're placed in the same room and Rika starts to get to know Kaji more, she starts to become influenced by Kaji's way of life and pulling her friend with her. So before we get to some close reading some passages, I want to open it up. I know that was a lot of information, and I'm just talking a lot, but I wanted to give some breathing space here. Do you have any immediate thoughts or questions about the author or the book? Yes, Allison, go ahead.
I'm hoping my mic will work. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Were the issues of sexism that are present in the novel about the trial also present in Kijima's trial?
Absolutely. Yes. I think also, and I can't pull up exact examples of the real case, but I know that the way it's depicted in Butter, the media, the industry in Japan is mostly men. And the protagonist, Rika, being a female journalist, is still quite a rare thing. And so she has to fight in a man's world. And she's constantly fighting off like her bosses and colleagues who are trying to paint a very misogynistic picture of this criminal, mostly, especially because she's a woman. If this were the other way around, and if it was a male serial killer, he would probably not be so scrutinized for his appearance or weight. So I think, yeah, there is a lot of that sexism apparent. And what I think is so great about this book is that it will, talk about it very directly. And I think the book is very critical of those aspects of Japanese culture, which is why it was, I think, so shocking for Japanese readers, but also so intriguing. And that's what made it a bestseller.
Interesting.
Other questions or thoughts? All right. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Andy.
Oh, I just want to say I got the book last week from the Parnassus. So I read about like 16 pages. And I was a little bit taken aback by that very conservative views there. And I was wondering whether this is exactly how Japan looks like right now. When you answer that actually maybe, that it is, it's true.
Yeah.
But taking from the perspective of one of her friends, what was the name of the friend?
Reiko?
Yes. So she's a female, but her views are also conservative, right? She's thinking about being pregnant. Like I started reading about it. It was all about becoming pregnant, having kids and all of that. So her views were also even very conservative. So
yes,
it was quite interesting.
You raise a really interesting point. Thank you, Andy. And I feel like, and I talk about this often with my other Japanese friends who live in America, but, in Japan, I think it's hard to talk about like progressive or conservative in quite the same way as America, just because it's just, we have very different histories. So for example, and not to give anything away, but there is a lot of character development throughout the
Okay.
book. So the character might start out being one way, but might change throughout the course.
Excellent. Good.
So, don't worry if you're kind of taken aback, or if you even feel very uncomfortable by some of this. I think you can take it as the author's intent, and just keep going and trust the process. It's going to have a resolution and some twists that will satisfy you as a reader. But in Japan, I think there is a lot of movement around, making sure that women can work and be mothers, but it's still quite a long ways to go compared to a place like America. But, even in America, we have a lot of issues with women getting childcare too. So I think it's just like the different countries have similar problems, and they might be in different places, but it's hard to say that Reiko is conservative, because I think a lot of her ideas are also pretty progressive, actually, for Japan in that context. So I think what I'm hoping to do, especially when we close read some of the passages, and I can do a little bit of the cultural nuance explanations, but while you're reading this book, if you're not as familiar with Japan, I think it's important to try to read it, as though from the perspective of a Japanese reader a little bit, because I think for a purely American reader, some of this might sound a little, like antiquated, or when someone says like, it's okay to love your body, even if you're fat, like that sounds, a little outdated in America. Like there's a lot of dialogue about being very positive about your body, but that's sentiment it's wildly progressive for Japan today. So just kind of understanding like where the cultures are at. I hope that makes sense.
Yes. Well, I mean, I moved to the United States. Well, it was almost 30 years ago, but when I moved here, actually, I felt a little bit like reading that book right now, because I lived in under communism, right, in communistic Poland. And when I came here, our communist was the devil, right? But over there, it was like completely normal, equal rights for men and women. And I thought that's how world functions. And I came here and met some people, and they told me, oh, yes, I work here at the university, but my wife is at home because that is she's supposed to be, and she takes care of kids and everything. And I thought, did I move west? But in the same time, I moved in time backwards. And so now, after all these years, I see a movement here towards equality. And then I read that book and I said, well, where is Japan in all this picture? So that was very interesting.
Yeah, I do hope you keep reading. And, again, I don't want to give any spoilers, but yeah, like the discussions on marriage and expectations and pregnancy and all that, like it does evolve. And I think the author is so aware and really bold with taking characters in places that are going to make readers maybe uncomfortable sometimes, but will really make you think a lot. So
cool. I definitely will read it more.
So I'm going to share my screen again to some closed passages, and I want to share just a few delicious examples. So we'll start, if you have the book in front of you, I'm going to start from page 30. And if you don't have the book in front of you, fear not, because I have a PDF that I'm going to share. So let's see, there it is. Share my screen. Okay. I'm going to scroll all the way up here. This is page 30. And Allison, would you mind unmuting yourself? And before we read this part, the only context you need is this is one of the first moments that Rika is speaking with Kaji inside the Tokyo Detention Center. And this is their conversation. So from You Must Make Yourself Rice.
I'm giggling because we had an online book club on Goodreads, and this is the passage that by far was the most discussed. Everybody made themselves rice with butter and soy sauce after reading this book.
Oh,
Sorry.
That's funny. Yeah, no, well, I hope that out of this discussion, we can not be disgusted, but be, get your mouths watering. And maybe you'll even try it afterwards. But yeah, go ahead and read it.
You must make yourself rice with butter and soy sauce. For a moment, Rika failed to process Kaji's words, and she let out a quiet, hmm? Add butter and soy sauce to freshly cooked rice. Even someone who doesn't cook can manage that much, I'm sure. It's the best meal to truly understand the glory of butter. Her manner of delivery was so grave that it made it impossible to even think of ridiculing her. I want you to use salted eshire butter. There's an eshire shop in Marinucci, I think, Marinucci Station. Go there and look at it properly before you buy it. The current shortage is a perfect opportunity to sample first-class butter from overseas. When I'm eating good butter, I feel somehow as though I were falling. Falling? Yes, not floating gently upwards, but falling. The same feeling as when the lift plunges toward the ground floor. The body plummets, starting from the very tip of the tongue. Rika attempted to recall the feeling of gravity that she'd experienced in the lift she'd just ridden. So sucked in was she by Kaji's way of speaking that she'd forgotten to take any notes. Now she was startled to notice Kaji's eyes and lips growing moist. Her entranced gaze was directed somewhere else, some place that wasn't this room. The butter should still be cold. Remove it from the fridge just before. Superior quality butter should be eaten when it's still cold and hard to truly luxuriate in its texture and aroma. It will begin to melt almost immediately with the heat of the rice, but I want you to eat it before it melts fully. Cool butter and warm rice. First of all, savor the difference in their temperatures. Then, the two will melt alongside one another, mingle together, and form a golden fountain right there inside your mouth. Even without seeing it, you just know that it's golden. That's the way it tastes. You'll sense the individual grains of rice coated in butter and an aromatic fragrance as if the rice...
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
were being fried will ascend to your nose. A rich, milky sweetness will spread itself across your tongue. Rika felt her mouth growing moist. She knew that if she swallowed now, she'd let out a loud gulp, which she very much wished to avoid. Kaji sat up straight and clasped her plump fingers in front of her chest. If I speak to you again, it will most likely be after you've decided that you will never again let margarine pass your lips.
So we're going to pause there for a little bit, and we're going to scroll down to, if you're reading the book, this is going to be 2 pages after in my version, page 33. Allison, could you keep reading from, this is later at home when she makes this and is describing this little meal. So from she had sampled.
Sure. She had sampled the buttered rice that was sometimes served with burger patties, but she'd never encountered rice with soy sauce and butter, let alone piping hot rice with top-class butter. She perched a sliver of butter on top of the rice. From one of the sachets of soy sauce that came with the convenience store bento boxes and which tended to accumulate in her apartment, she squeezed a single drop into the bowl. Just as instructed, she moved the butter and some rice to her mouth before the butter had a chance to melt. The first thing Rika felt was a strange breeze emanating from the back of her throat. The cold butter first met the roof of her mouth with a chilly sensation, contrasting with the steaming rice in both texture and temperature. The cool butter clashed against her teeth, and she felt its soft texture right down into their roots. Soon enough, just as Kaji had said, the melted butter began to surge through the individual grains of rice. It was a taste that could only be described as golden, a shining golden wave with an astounding depth of flavor, and yet a faint yet full and rounded aroma wrapped itself around the rice and washed Rika's body far away.
Thank you.
Yep.
So that passage is one of the first instances we get of, the author showing off the ability to describe food in the most descriptive, specific way. And you can also tell if you've read any Banana Yoshimoto that direct influence. Banana Yoshimoto also has some great lengthy descriptions of what one flavor is like for someone's sensory, all the sensory things firing off. And
They're not as erotic though.
that's true. That's true. Asako Yuzuki takes it to a whole nother level. I think Banana Yoshimoto is a little bit more reserved than that. But yes, so some other meals to watch out for if you're reading this book. There's another great scene where she makes spaghetti with fish eggs and butter and soy sauce. There's a bit of a risque description of eating miso ramen with butter. I'm not going to say anything more. For those of you who read the book, you might know what I'm talking about. And then, there's it gets more and more elaborate as the book goes on and as the character starts to learn how to really cook these big meals. Because, we start with Rika not even having a rice cooker. And by the end, you see her preparing really elaborate things using, good butter for big feasts. So it's really great to experience this book through those meals. And that was just the first one. But if you enjoy that, you're going to enjoy the other ones too. So the next passage I'm going to share. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. So putting a cold butter on hot or warm rice, that's an interesting idea. I know that I would never thought about it. I would rather try to wait until the butter will, will warm up to room temperature. So is it something like that the author came up on her own, or is it actually the natural how people would eat it? And she just make this beautiful poetic description of it.
That's a really, really good question. My guess is that it is particular to Kaji and this character and the way she eats. I think just like, people have a lot of opinions about putting butter on toast. Like there might be some people who like the cold butter on toast or people who want it melted. I think there's a lot of schools of thought, even in Japan. I'll ask some of the, I guess, Reina, like, are you the type to put cold butter or would you wait until it melts to eat it? I think I'm kind of like in between. I want it to be a little bit melted, but still a little bit in shape. Sorry to put you on the spot. I was just wondering.
That's okay. My opinion, it might not be very poetic or some liturgic. I'm busy. I usually keep a butter inside in the refrigerator. I slice it and I put the butter on the rice immediately. So, but as I read the page, I heard the page, so I could. I was thinking how I ate the rice with butter. Sometimes the cold butter. I ate cold butter and then hot rice. So
okay.
So
I'm also seeing
a little cultural thing.
Yeah. I think so. And as Heather pointed out in the chat, she says she uses cold butter chopped for homemade biscuit dough folded in. I have a friend who's French, and she is very particular about the way she puts butter on baguette, on sliced baguette. And I feel like there's probably no right or wrong. It's just people have their preferences, Oh, William?
When my dad would eat rice, he would always put soy sauce and refuse to put butter on it. And then when my mom would eat rice, it would be butter and refuse to put soy sauce on it. And she would mix the butter and melt it in. It was interesting seeing the two differences between the two with that.
Right.
But William's mother was Japanese, or
no,
William's father's mother was Japanese. So maybe that's where he got the soy sauce and the butter. So sorry.
Really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Oh, and thank you for clarifying, Alice. Yes, biscuits can only be made with cold butter and ice cold buttermilk. Yes, that's a very good point. Yeah, so if I feel like every culture too has a relationship with butter, and this book will make you see it in a totally different light through Japanese foods. And even with the French foods, I think it's like French food as a Japanese person prefers it. So it might not be authentically French, or, there's a lot of foods like that in Japan where it's been influenced by other cultures, but has become so particular to Japan. So, you know, these ways of eating it too are going to be very particular. I'm going to share my screen again. I would love to share a few more excerpts from the book. So we're going to.
Could I
Oh,
say
yeah.
one thing about butter before you move on? I'm sorry.
Oh, yes, of course. Go ahead,
Um,
Heather.
When I was taught to do biscuits that way, I was told because you can control when the butter melts easier. And I wonder if there is, I think Allison pointed out, this is a little steamy. Maybe it's about, you know, what happens to the butter happens inside of you and you control it instead of it happening outside of you. And I'm wondering, you know, because there's some chemistry in food, maybe that's just another way to think about the cold butter. Like what is happening inside of you. I know that sounds a little spicy as I say it.
Oh,
but,
no, I love it. I think that is such a good point. And also later in the book, there is a scene where some people are eating instant ramen actually with some butter, and they like open the window so that the cold air can come in, and then it makes them enjoy that, like, you know, the hot noodles more. So I think there is something to that control or that experience of the different temperatures that's just extra exhilarating for the body, you know. And I think metaphorically too, Kaji is someone who is a perfectionist, and she like knows what she's doing with the food, and she knows how it's going to affect the people. And yeah, I would not be surprised if that was a very deliberate choice. Yeah. The next passage that we're going to look at is from a little bit further, a little bit later in the book. This is page 93 in my edition. And this is from a part where, and I'm sharing my screen now, this is where we get a sense of Kaji's villainous, also intriguing voice. So if I could have Andy, if you're still okay to read out loud for us, and if you can see my screen, could you read from How Did You Manage to Make?
Yeah. I have also a book in front of me.
Wonderful. Okay, so
Maybe,
this is yeah, you can just read from your copy,
yes.
but I'll scroll down so that the rest of us can also see. So
Yes.
this is page 93.
Yes, you just need to tell me when to stop.
Yes, I will.
Because- okay. So how did you manage, starting here?
Yes, please.
Okay. How did you manage to make such delicious meals for men when you had no intention of being with long term? Wasn't it a bore? You really don't understand anything, do you? Rika was sure that she heard Kaji click her tongue. It gives me pleasure to give men pleasure. It's not work, at least as you conceive of it. Caring for, supporting, and warming the hearts of men is women's God-given role, and without fail, performing it makes women beautiful. They become goddesses. Don't you see? You find so many hard, spiky women these days because they lack love towards men and are unsatisfied as a result. You have to understand that women can never hope to rival men's power. That's nothing to be ashamed of. When you acknowledge the differences between the sexes, when you accept men for how they are and work to support and please them, a future of freedom and abundance awaits you. Everyone is suffering because they are trying to rail against the natural order of things. As she spoke, Kaji's face was contorted by a violent anger and frustration at odds with the content of what she was saying. Her mouth and nose took up unusual positions, giving her a wholly different face to the one that Rika had become accustomed to. Her eyes grew bloodshot, and her irises startling dark. Women's obsession with work and independence and so on is the source of their dissatisfaction. When women surpass men, their chance for romance slips away from them. Men and women alike need to understand that they can't find happiness without each other.
So that's the end of that
Oh.
passage. Thank you for reading, Andy.
Thank you.
I wanted to share that to share just the voice of this criminal who is central to the story, and to, you know, and throughout the book, she is cast as this like opposite end of the spectrum of, you know, of Rika, and then slowly they start to kind of play with each other's ideas, or more like it's a little bit more one-sided because Rika starts to, you know, consume more butter and cook the things that Kaji cooked. And to try to just understand her motives and how she was able to lure the men with her cooking. And I should also note that earlier from this passage, Kaji actually says she hates two things, and that's margarine and feminists. And so, you know, like she's just kind of depicted as this almost comically angry, like she's just so extreme in what she's saying, but also how she's saying it. You can see in the descriptions, the bloodshot eyes. Like if you've been to Japan and you've, you know, even as a tourist kind of encountered like Japanese people, like, you know, that this would be very, very extreme to witness. Most of the times people are not going to show their emotions like that. And Kaji is this very eccentric, singular individual who I think the author imagined the real criminal to be like. So I wanted to open this up to discussion, like what, you know, popped out for you, and if you have read the book, sort of like what your take on this character was.
Well,
Well,
I have yes read the book, but
Go
so
ahead. You go ahead, Andy.
I just said I haven't read the book, but I read that passage, and that was very interesting, very like very strict again, and like conservative, and very like there is dichotomy, man and women, right? Women
It's
and
very
men.
extreme. Yeah,
Very
the way she looks at the world is very
Yes.
binary, very, yes.
Exactly, very binary. So my question is, if I may ask, I don't know if it's in the book, maybe I'm going on a tangent here, but and I haven't been in Japan, so let me pick your brain about that. How about the queer community? People who are not men, you know, like in between it, are they like there? How they are seen?
That's a really, really good question. In this book, so one thing that you might notice, and this isn't super explicit, but so as you start to get to know Rika and Reiko's friendship, you learn that when they were both in an all-girls school, that Rika was seen as the prince, and Reiko had a bit of a crush on her in a sort of innocuous, but maybe more suggestive way. And they're still friends. They never take their relationship beyond a friendship. But I think in Japanese culture, you know, even though it's not like America where gay marriage is legal everywhere, there is one city where you can, called Shibuya in Tokyo. And I think there's a growing LGBTQ movement there too. But it's not as discussed yet. It's not really out in the open as much as America, I would say. And but when you read this book, you might find those undertones of that
Interesting.
of not quite there, but suggested that there might have been a little bit of a romantic feeling in that friendship early on. And I think, you know, if you're encountering popular culture too, like through manga or animation, you might encounter similar dynamics between like same-sex characters, especially in a high school setting or something like that. So yes, I don't want to say that like it's not at all, or yes, there is. It's somewhere sort of in between, but that's a really good question.
I thought it was
Yeah,
not.
go ahead.
I thought it was valid to even read that there was still a romantic possibility in their friendship, especially in about the middle third of the novel.
Yeah, I think you could read it that way, although the author doesn't quite, you know, show it to you, and maybe it's maybe it leaves room for interpretation for readers. Yes.
Cool.
Did you read this in English or Japanese or
Yes,
both?
I was gonna answer Heather's question about the word God-given. I have not read the Japanese original. I've only read the translation, but I'm assuming that in Japanese, the word she must have used is kami-sama or kami, which does translate to God, but not maybe in the, you know, Christian sense of God. like in Japan, I think people are comfortable talking about, you know, God or gods in a more general spiritual way, but it's not in the same way that maybe American Christians would talk about God or other religions. So that's another, great question about that wording, but I wish I could check. Next time I'm in Japan, I will take a look. Any other questions or thoughts? Oh, Ginger.
Sorry. So yeah, I haven't read the book yet. I'm going to, but so is Kaji, you said she's written as an eccentric character, but is there any empathy toward her? Is she just totally like bad and dislikable, or do you feel sorry for her some in the book?
That's another great question. I feel like, you know, I don't know if you've ever seen Silence of the Lambs, that horror movie. I think Kaji is kind of like Hannibal Lecter.
Oh,
in that throughout the book, there is another character who's really curious and wants to get in, like Rika just wants to understand this eccentric person and to try to maybe paint her as like she's kind of trying hard to understand this person, and goes really deep into, you know, personal histories, even going to Kaji's hometown to investigate and try to understand when she became this way. But and you know, throughout the course of the book, and again, I don't want to give spoilers, I think there is an element of you're left to question whether Kaji was also manipulating Rika this entire time, that she was never really being quite genuine, you know, and maybe her eccentric bursts were also kind of performative. And so I don't think that is ever answered, but it's like, I think as a reader, as much as I disagreed completely with what Kaji was saying, I couldn't help but be really intrigued. Like, I just felt like, especially if I were reading this in Japan, I think I would feel shock that someone could say all these things so bluntly. And I think that's what drew Japanese readers to this too. Like, it was like, oh, I can't believe someone is actually saying these things. Like, I thought you weren't supposed to talk about these things like this. So it's a little bit refreshing, you know, but at the same time, very, like, there's still a visceral kind of disgust, I think, towards her character. Did anybody else have a visceral reaction to this character?
I don't know how you can answer this question without spoilers. I think
I
your
know,
attitude toward this
I know.
character changes drastically, depending on what part of the book you're reading.
Okay.
Yes.
I don't know if anyone remembers the old song Man Eater, but
yes,
it reminded me of that song. Yeah, that's yeah. Cool, scary, and cool. Scary and cool.
right. And I'm so sorry. I feel like this always happens when I do these sessions. We're almost out of time. So if you do have the book, I'm just going to tell you the page numbers to also watch out for. If you want to maybe get a glimpse of the slide that I presented with Japan's beauty standards and their relationship to food, I recommend you look at pages 188 and 189. This is a discussion between Rika and her friend Reiko. And it's actually a very beautiful moment when Reiko, you know, is showing that she's a very supportive friend and is able to change her mind about something. And it's really heartening to see two Japanese women talk very openly about what Japanese diet culture has done to them and make them re-examine like their relationship with food. It's really quite beautiful. So that was the other passage I was going to share, but I also want to be mindful of everyone's time and to leave the next few minutes just for other questions or thoughts you might have had about what we discussed so far, even if you haven't finished reading it, or if you have finished reading it, do you have like a burning comment that you want to make before we end the session?
Of her other books,
I was just going to point out that, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. Of her other books, which one would you recommend the most?
Oh gosh, so I have not read her other books. I think this might be her first translated book. No,
this is the only one translated into English.
Yes.
I was going to try to read it in Japanese.
But I will say, if you are a fan of this book, and I don't know if you've already read all the Banana Yoshimoto's, but that's the one that I was going to point people towards as like the predecessor. And then if you enjoy some of the convenience store parts, Convenience Store Women, which I think JAST already discussed a few years ago with Masami Tyson. But this is another great book that explores that food culture.
That's a great book. Yeah, I enjoyed that.
Yeah, and I can give you more suggestions if you. I'm reachable, by email and through my website and whatnot. So yeah, feel free to
Thank
ask
you.
me things beyond this. Any other questions or thoughts?
What I was going to say kind of follows up. It obviously doesn't answer your question for things in Japanese, but I was going to point out that this is a very Polly Barton translation. Polly Barton
Yes.
translates extremely British. And this is a markedly British translation, which I
You're
think
right,
most
like
of
that
us are. Yeah,
What
the
does it mean?
passage we read reminded me because it says like lift instead of
lift.
elevator.
Mhm.
Oh,
A
right.
lot of even British translators will translate into very neutral English or American English. And it's kind of refreshing to remember that Americans aren't the only people who speak English, although it's sometimes like reading a double translation. This is both not
Yes.
English. This is not my English, and it's also, wasn't written in English to begin with. But Polly Barton selects books that are often on the same kinds of themes and topics. So if you're not specifically looking for a Japanese read, anything else translated by Polly Barton is going to give you some of the same overarching themes.
Absolutely. And I actually did one of these reading between the lines sessions on a book she translated called Where the Wild Ladies Are. And that's a book of interconnected stories. Similarly about like women enraged by the system and also tapping into Japanese folklore. That one's a great one. Yeah, and I just love everything she does. And what's great about the time we live in now is that we live in a time of very gifted Japanese translators who are working with a lot of writers, and that's how we're getting to know so many authors besides Banana Yoshimoto and Murakami. Like we're getting to know a lot of new names in Japanese literature, including Asako Yuzuki. And I'm hopeful that we'll see more translations, given that I think this US edition has done incredibly well. So cross our
So
fingers for
is
more.
the translator British?
Yes, I believe. Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Oh, and thank you for that link, Allison. Yes, you can read the stories at that link in the chat. So thank you for that. All right. Well, our time is sadly up, but I hope that we can stay connected, and we'll be back for more reading between the lines every few months.